No writer likes to hear that a reader DNF'd their book, but if this does happen to you, what you really ought to be asking yourself is, why did they DNF it, and what can you do about it? Hi there, my name is Katie Morgan. I am an indie fantasy author and fiction editor, and welcome to Bardic Fool's Editing Advice for Writers, the series where we talk about the ins and outs of editing and getting feedback on your creative work. Today's video is all about the dreaded DNF. For folks who might be unfamiliar, DNF is an acronym that stands for did not finish, and it's often used as a verb, as in, I DNF'd that book because it was super boring. So in this video, I thought it might be useful to approach the idea of DNFing from the perspective of an editor. So why might an editor DNF your book? I want to clarify a couple of things before we get started. If you have hired an editor, they will definitely never DNF your book. That would be super unprofessional. And also, of course, if you are in the process of editing your work, it's incomplete at this point, so there's still room for improvement. And the editor is here to help you through that process. But editors are also readers, so I thought it might be interesting to talk about what an editor might be thinking while they're reading, even if they're just reading for fun. The other thing with DNFing is that a lot of it is kind of down to personal preference, which is not what we're going to be covering in this video. I want to think about DNFing from the perspective of the editing of the piece rather than what I personally like and dislike in a novel. Here are the 5 reasons why I might DNF a book. Reason number 1, bad copy editing. Friends, there is really no excuse for bad copy editing. You need to be using more than just spell check or a grammar check. You really need another set of eyes on your work. And to be clear here, I'm not talking about the couple of typos that get through. That's going to happen no matter what, because we're all human and we can't catch absolutely everything. But I think it's really, really clear when someone hasn't put in the time and the effort to have their work copy edited, and that's something you should really avoid. Bad copy editing can really quickly take a reader out of the story. I've seen a lot of popular professional writers say things like, oh, you don't need to worry about copy editing because readers will forgive a few typos. And I'm not going to say that's not true. However, I can think of one very, very popular writer who made this kind of claim, but if you go and look at the 1-star reviews for their work, they pretty much all mention something about the copy editing and how frustrating it was to see so many errors. So really what I'm saying here is please get a copy editor, a proofreader, some other set of eyes on your work for the mechanical editing stuff. It may not seem like a big deal, but it really does stand out to readers, and not just editors who are trained to notice this stuff. Reason number 2, pacing. This is something that's kind of a personal preference, but I also think you really need to keep in mind what is relevant for your genre. Some genres are really commonly fast-paced, and others tend to be a little bit slower. So as a reader, if I'm going in expecting a certain kind of pace and I get something completely different, it's not going to be a good time, and I'm probably going to DNF. The other thing to consider here with pacing is that you really want to hook the reader right away. You don't want to do what journalism calls burying the lead, so taking a really long time to get to the main point. If you do this, it's probably going to lead to a lot more DNFs because there are so many books out there, and a lot of folks, myself included, don't really want to waste our time with something that isn't working so well when we can just move on to the next thing. Pacing is something that is pretty easy to address in the developmental editing process, so I would really encourage you to do that. Reason number 3, I can't connect with the characters. This is another thing that's kind of a personal preference. I happen to like really character-driven stories, but I think any reader is going to really want to see characters who are interesting and engaging. Note that I didn't say likable, they just have to be interesting. And to be clear, I don't mean you can't use tropes as the basis for your characters, but you need to find ways to kind of make them your own. Basically, you gotta make the reader care about the people to whom the plot is happening, because if they don't care, then why would they keep reading? This is where your developmental editing and beta readers can be really helpful. Reason number 4, unbelievable relationships. This is kind of an offshoot of the previous one. For me, as a reader and as an editor, I always want to know, why are these characters interacting the way they're interacting? Is it believable? Is their dynamic consistent? And here, I don't want to harsh on anyone's trope, but I think insta-love is potentially a really good example of this problem. I think the problem with insta-love is it kind of skips over that part where the author tells us, why do these characters like each other? Why did they fall in love? Why are they compatible? I think insta-love can be used as an excuse choose not to fully develop a relationship, which can be really frustrating as a reader because you don't understand why these characters are attracted to each other. Fan fiction is kind of an exception here because, generally speaking, you already know who the characters are and you already kind of know their dynamic coming into the story. But if you're writing something completely original where people may not know these characters yet, that can be a real problem. And I don't mean to imply that this is just a romantic relationship thing. It could be relevant to any relationship. Why are these characters interacting the way they are? We need to understand that because it's a way of really engaging with the characters and understanding how the characters evolve. So if the relationships don't really make a whole lot of sense, then it's hard to really care about the characters. And reason number 5, obsessive world building. Look, I'm a fantasy writer, so I get it. But as I mentioned before, we've got to care about the people to whom the plot is happening. So similarly, we have to care about the people who live in the world. So if you're focusing just on the world, then it's hard to really engage thoroughly with the story. I think a lot of times world building can end up being this sort of long tangent on urban chicken farming, which doesn't really have anything to do with the main plot and the characters. So we're very pleased that you know all of this fantastic information about chicken farming, but what does it have to do with the story? As a writer, you probably know more about your world than anyone else, and that gives you a lot of really great opportunities to engage the reader and immerse them in this world. However, they've still got to care about what's happening, so there needs to be actual character and plot and other things happening, not just sort of describing the world that you've created. Readers want to be immersed, but they also want stuff to happen. This is an area where there is some subjectivity depending on the reader and on the genre. Some folks like a lot of world building, other folks like a little bit less, but it's important to note that you can really turn readers off by spending a lot of time on world building and not really giving readers an idea of why they should care. World building is just one element of your story. And if you spend too much time just on that, you're probably going to lose some readers. So those are the 5 reasons why I might DNF a book as seen through the lens of an editor. I will readily admit that I have a lot of trouble turning off my editor brain, even when I'm just reading for pleasure, so your mileage may vary with these kinds of things. But I think it's important to keep these 5 things in mind as you're writing and editing your work, because it's not just editors that are going to get tripped up on this stuff. I would love to know your top reasons for DNFing a book. Please leave them in the comments below and let's chat. If you'd like to talk about any of these elements with regard to your own writing, I've got some information below about working with me as an editor. I've also included some information about my contemporary fantasy novel, Dark Empathy, if you're looking for something to read. I can't confirm that no one's ever DNF'd it, but I didn't. That's it for this episode of Bardic Fool's Editing Advice for Writers. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.